Ivo, just please, you can start now with everything.
Okay. Hey everyone. Welcome to another AEC webinar. The theme of today's webinar is making a career shift. I am joined by Mr. Greg Rogers, Mondi, and Weija, who are all superstars that have transformed their careers, and I'll let them introduce themselves for you. Greg, you want to start?
Oh, I'm going first. Fine, I guess. My name's Greg Rogers, and I am the founder of Rio Creative Consultancy, which is an architectural visualization focused creative consulting firm where our general mission is to help businesses of all types, of all sizes, reevaluate their visualization process and take care of the core, foundational issues that are preventing artists from being themselves. And prior to that, I spent about 5 years as the head of visualization at WeWork, where I've worked with some of the people here and some of the people in the chat. And so that will also link into part of the conversation we've had about making the transition from that particular career.
I can go next. My name is Mondi. I am product manager most recently with a company called Teal. It's a startup focused on enabling professional growth with technology tools, community, and training content related to that. Part of what we do is also help people with career pivots and transitions. So everyone here, like if you're already online, go ahead and visit tealhq.com and check it out. I am an architect by training. I kind of started out there. I used to describe myself as a really bad architect and a worse software developer that managed to cause a lot of trouble in between. And that pretty much does sum up my career. I didn't realize how bad it was to introduce myself by saying all the things I wasn't. That should have been my aha moment. It wasn't for a very long time. But that kind of ethos of leveraging technology to make me better at the things I did took me through a long kind of shotgun arc through laser scanning to visualization to working at architecture firms. I'm previously Cone Peterson Fox, eventually at WeWork with Lebo and Greg. And a lot of the people in chat, like it's really great to see like so many familiar names. And then eventually now here at Teal.
Great, so I'll go next. Hi everyone, my name is Weija Song. I currently work as a affordable housing real estate developer here in San Francisco for Eden Housing. Eden Housing is a nonprofit affordable housing developer with over $2 billion in assets here in California. We have about over 100 different properties, and we have served and we have created about 10,000 units. And I transitioned into real estate development and affordable housing after going to architecture school with Lebo at Rice University. And so my background is inherently in architecture and design. I worked at Shop Architects in New York for a while, as well as Ricardo Bofill in Barcelona. And then from there, because architecture is still very much one of my passions, I am a co-founder of Collective Operations, an architecture firm based here in San Francisco, with a focus on not only design, but also real estate investment. And we have projects here in San Francisco, in New Mexico, and New Zealand, actually, which is where I'm from originally. So looking forward to talking to everyone more today.
Damn, Weija. That's why we save you for last. Okay, so let's do our first question. I hope everyone came prepared. So without giving our previous industries too much disrespect, what gave you the first idea to start making the change? Let's start with Weija and go in reverse order.
Yeah, that's a great question and one I feel very passionate about. After working in architecture for about 4 years in New York, I realized what I studied in school was not necessarily what was being practiced in the real world. Architecture is still a very service-based industry where we bill for our hours, and there's only a number of hours in a day. There's only so much time you can dedicate yourself to your craft, and especially with something like design, something that you care a lot about, you end up sinking a lot of time and effort into something that might not eventually get built. So what prompted my change from architecture is really to have more agency and equity in my work as a designer, and that was through investment in real estate. With architecture in general, you're building a building that generates cash flow, that generates income, but architects never really harness that long-term profit generating asset. So for me, it was more a way to give myself more agency in my design, more control in deciding what actually gets built, and being able to invest in architecture that I think would hopefully make a difference.
Andy?
Yep. I was just like stewing on Wage's story because like there's so much that resonates there. I feel like a common thing to say is that like architectural education is a fantastic experience. Like it's challenging. It's kind of romantic in the right ways. And like when you hit industry like architecture, you realize a lot of the differences. And that's kind of something that's similar that happened to me. Even though I'd always been kind of technology oriented, I ended up attempting to develop technology in the architecture context. And although I found success there, what I really was thirsty for was a change and kind of a reimagination of what it meant to have projects. And that was a realization for me when I realized that staying in the architecture industry was going to be hard for me, was that I had this fundamental misunderstanding between what it meant to create a project. Architectural projects are these kind of huge one-off things, and architecture firms kind of see them that way. And I realized that as much as I was very, very proud to be part of those projects, what I really wanted to do was create like ongoing products, things that I could hand to someone and that they would have a life of their own afterward that had control. And it took me a long time to kind of arrive at that vocabulary. Like, what in the world is a product? So like I spent my time at Kohn Pedersen Fox and WeWork trying to figure out how products can actually, or how there was space for products in the architecture and built environment world, and started focusing on building those. And that was kind of like my transition out of the traditional practice of being an architect and designer within a firm.
Yeah, so I guess my story is a little bit different because I don't come from an architecture background. I wasn't smart enough, nor did I have the patience for architecture. I don't know how you guys even thought about that. I studied interior design, and I came across that because I thought it was a really great creative outlet for me, but I graduated when the market crashed, so I never worked as a designer, and that quickly, went away. But in that curriculum, there was the 3D rendering, the 3D visualization. I said, this is cool. I could really latch on to this. There's a whole industry behind it. I had no idea. And so I got my first job doing that. And then for the better part of a decade, I was an artist working in New York, in LA, and then back to New York for WeWork. And for the first half of my tenure at WeWork, I was an artist as well. But then we grew to be around 17 artists, in half in London, half in New York. So I took on a more managerial role, and it suited me at the time during the hyper growth stage of WeWork's growth. It was very rapid fire. I was up and around, moving around, talking to so many different people. So my personality really lended itself well to that managerial role. And I think I didn't even think about creating the work anymore because one, my team wouldn't let me, because they would just say, like, just, you don't have time, let us do it. And so there's a little bit of back and forth there. So I finally let go. and let my team just explode as the brilliant artists. And now you see their work all the time. And I think when WeWork went through the transition of the failed IPO and a lot of things kind of turned around, my role as a manager kind of wasn't being fulfilled as it was before. And so I think I made the decision to leave WeWork because of that. I don't think I really wanted to get back into the production line of work because I felt like the team already had such a brilliant system going on. I'd kind of hold them back, and so I kind of decided to just leave and see what happened. And nothing really triggered me to make a change up until I was approached to work for other companies, and it was way too soon. And then a few of these firms said, well, how about you come on as a consultant? I said no. And then another company said the same thing. And then it came to me, this transition into a whole nother industry. I was like, well, screw it. Let me just become a consultant. And let me just figure out what that means, what that could look like. And then once I had my mind set on that, I was like, okay, that was really spontaneous. That came out of nowhere, this idea. But I think once I started gaining traction in the consulting world, learning about how I could help using my expertise of the last decade, it really became clear to me that this was an appropriate transition out of the creative world and out of the managerial world, but still leveraging my personality, that when I wake up every day, it's important for me to, express myself in my work.
Absolutely. I mean, the passion definitely shows. I think everyone who knew you when, we were working together always can point to you as someone who not only, channels their own passion, but also, as you said with your team, build the right environment for them to thrive. And I think with that, you can lead us off on the next question. What do you think connects what you do now with something you were always passionate about?
Well, I don't know, man. I know you sent me these questions before, and I felt like this question was going to be kind of hard to answer, but I think generally what connects me with what I do now is something I'm always passionate about. I don't want to like the easy way out of saying like helping people, because I've never always wanted to help people. I mean, I think there's part of me that's just this is tough. Something you're always passionate about. I just think change.
Does someone want to do theirs while Greg is thinking?
No. I'm just gonna.
You got this.
Forward. Yeah. I think the change and growth and the spontaneity of an industry like architectural visualization and 3D rendering was like, there's always room to grow and there's always something to learn, and that's something that any artist will tell you, is that they can't stop learning. Especially now with all the different software and all the different technology that's out there, there's never enough time in the day to learn what there is, and that's why I thought that I want to really latch onto that energy and that understanding about what's out there, and being able to help educate young artists, medium level artists, and businesses of all sizes that, hey, look, there is hope and there is time out there for you to learn and to grow as an artist, but here are some foundational things that I believe can help you and your team find more time to grow. And I think communicating with people, helping people grow and just hearing what they have to say and then coming up with solution, an efficient way to scale their growth, was something that I always kind of really latched onto, especially when I was working at WeWork.
Wants to follow that up, Mondi?
I'll follow it up just because, like, my original answer while I was when I got this question from Lebo and I was like really digging deep trying to figure out my answer to it, the first instinct was helping people. It was like that was the answer. It was just like, as general and strange that answer is, it's like it was a good one for the reason. And coming up with the answer, realizing how general it was, like, it made me dig deeper. Like, what was it about helping people I really want to do? And I think the thing that this is hard for me to say because like it's something that I continually try and revisit the answer to. So like I'm constantly thinking about it, especially because my career transition is continuing to go on. Like, what is it about all of my previous roles that I am the most proud of? What were the tasks and kind of things that I did that really energized me, that weren't exhausting? And like, again, that really dumb answer, helping people was it. And like, how did I help those people? I think I took a lot of joy in building context for success. So I came to realize that like designers wanted space to design, engineers wanted space to engineer, users wanted space to kind of voice what they needed. They needed someone to listen to them and arrive at their intents, and like not really take marching orders, but really actually listen to them. And that's really how I arrived at this thing called product management, which like 4 years ago, I had no idea what the world it was. And realized that a lot of other people had no idea what in the world it was. But when I kind of started putting together the things that I've been doing for the past 5, 6 years, they really built up into what are the responsibilities of good product managers, which were just those things, helping people do the right stuff. And I feel like as much as the industries that I've worked in have really changed over the years, like that ethos is kind of what's been stabilizing for me. It's just like talking to people and figuring out what they need to do for the jobs to be done.
Absolutely, definitely see that connection between what we used to do before and a lot of like what's needed in the product area. Once again, way to bring us home.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of mentioned before that I'll always be passionate about architecture and design. And what a main connector is basically the difference between architecture and some of the other arts, such as fashion design or the visual arts, is that it takes a long time and a lot of capital to execute your piece of work. It takes perhaps a shirt takes several days or several weeks to make, but a building takes years. It takes years of planning. It takes at least a year and a half of construction. So there's this kind of time delay in seeing the gratification of your piece of work coming to life. And so what really kind of prompted my switch to real estate development is the ability to understand the back end, everything that needs to go into place to kind of bring a building to reality. And so right now, actually, even though it was kind of a way, my switch was a way for me to understand building architecture a bit more. It actually opened another door for another passion of mine, which is building affordable housing, especially here in California, where the need for affordable housing is incredibly high, even post-pandemic. The projects that we work on are mostly for extremely low-income families, so families earning less than 30% area median income. We just closed a project in East Palo Alto 2 months ago, and we're providing housing for formerly homeless, former foster youth, individuals with intellectual disabilities, and so it's been rewarding in a different sense, and you really get to see your design and your architecture play into create a real difference. And then the second piece of that is on the affordable housing side, at least there are certain goals that maybe a market rate developer would not have, certain commitments to that's not kind of fully profit driven. And just, for example, this project that we just closed, it's going to be 100% electric. It's going to be one of the first projects of its kind for the area. And we made a commitment to cut natural gas completely from the entire development. So, there are opportunities to really push the boundary when you start to see the other side.
Greg, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily a direct follow-up to her response, but I think we should also touch on the fact that, I mean, would we be even having this panel if there wasn't a pandemic? I think there's a lot that, an obvious answer to the question of like, oh, how did you make the shift and why did you make a shift? Well, it's like, well, I had to, there's no other way around it. And so I think that, especially for me, prior to committing to like the consulting world, which for me is going to take a substantial amount of time. It could take a year, it could take 5 years for this to really get off the ground. So I really needed to make sure there was a backup plan from a backup plan, and then realizing that there is no plan. And so, of course, there's a bunch of freelance work that you need to take on to keep you afloat, right? And then educating yourself with new software, keeping up with the latest trends within your industry, just in hopes that there's something that you can latch onto to make you some money. And like a perfect example of that is I'm investing with some friends of mine in some really high-tech 3D scanners, some Matterport scanners, some just cool, fun tools that you can monetize and create a business around and just make money off that. So it's really understanding the whole industry as a whole to understand where you could just latch onto. Because I think what everybody was so comfortable with their job, and I can't speak for everybody, but comfortable enough to get a paycheck, go into the office and come home, where you didn't have to worry about a global pandemic throwing everybody to shit, right? And I think that was a major factor into, all the decisions I think all of us and a lot of people watching really had to consider. It was like, okay, I have to move out of my apartment. I have to sell my car. I need to move states. A lot of these things were not just about the job, but they're about, our lives entirely.
Andy, Wager, do you guys have any COVID comments to add?
It's hard to say. I feel like there's something about the WeWork stories here where like there was a weird alignment of like events that kind of led up into the pandemic. I think with that and with COVID, there is much less stigma around unemployment now. That is allowing us to have like talks like this and have a wide forum for them. And I agree with Greg wholeheartedly that career transitions sometimes are instigated by opportunity and being let go from a job or being unemployed or feeling that need of life kind of matching with your career is an opportunity to kind of push forward change that you needed. This definitely happened to me when I was laid off from WeWork. Even though I started my career transition before I joined WeWork was definitely kind of a stepping stone in that. Like a lot of people, once I joined the job, started doing the job, found a team that I loved, I got complacent with my own professional growth. And the objectives for why I joined WeWork started to kind of fade because I felt successful. I was like, oh, like this feels great. I'm aligned with the company. I'm helping people. Like I'm kind of ticking off these kind of human check marks. But like then I started forgetting about like what the long-term goal was. And it really did take leaving WeWork, kind of mourning that job to kind of remind myself like, oh, I had this thing that I was aiming for a long time ago. I'm in a much better place to pursue it now. Like the plan was working, but it took a kick in the butt to kind of do it. And like with the pandemic and like this kind of like these massively public these public unemployment events and all the people coming forward to help, it was a lot easier to kind of step forward and say, hey, I'm unemployed right now. This is my story. This is my career transition. Who can I talk to? And I feel like that's some like advice that I do have is like, you're definitely not alone in all of this. And then that's kind of the positive side of the pandemic right now is like everybody's experiencing this all together, and there's help out there for you, even if it's someone else that needs help as well. It's really kind of cool to see, and it's one of the reasons why I joined TL too. That passion for helping out teammates, or that passion for what it means to be a good teammate and support other people's professional growth, I realized was something that I had always been like. I always had really strong opinions about. And when I encountered companies that didn't have those values, I was immediately upset. So one of the reason why I joined Teal was that we realized that There's no reason why those things should be attached to your employer. There's no reason why like the shame of unemployment should come when you leave, or like the amenities that you get from employment should leave you when you leave a job. So we immediately came to this idea that like, why don't we build infrastructure for that? And it's like, oh yeah, like that's a mission I can get on board with. Kind of to Weijia's point too, is just like if there's misalignment between your company's missions and you, that's also a kind of something you need to realize is important to you. And it took it going away for a little bit, and then like a little bit of retrospection, but I realized like, yeah, like there were missions that my company weren't reflecting that I had for myself. And if I weren't able to manifest that in work, I was going to have a bad time.
Absolutely. Weijia?
Well, if it's about the pandemic, one good thing about the pandemic, I guess, is I think it will dramatically change the way we live. I think experiencing just how its impact on where I live right now here in the Bay Area, which for the last few years have been experiencing incredible pressure due to employment growth due to Silicon Valley, and as a result on the property prices here in San Francisco. And what this pandemic has really shown is that we can really not need to be in the same location to work productively. And there's something pretty amazing about that, being able to live maybe in the deserts of Arizona, but then work for a company here in San Francisco. And then your colleagues are located, all across the world. And that will, I think, dramatically change our physical landscape as well. Do we even need, commercial buildings anymore? Does that open an opportunity to build something else there instead? I think it's a pretty cool and exciting time for those in the design field to really do something different that could, really shape the rest of the way we live for the next 100 years.
Absolutely. I'm sure Mondi and Greg both have thoughts on the future of space, given our history at WeWork. Do you guys want to comment on that before we move on to the next question?
No, not really.
I'd like to. I completely agree with Joe that like there's a lot of like the nature of built environment and work is definitely changing, and I think there's also kind of a parallel change in workplace culture too. Like the casualness that we all kind of see within each other when we're like looking through a camera or working from our homes is changing how we interact with other employees. Teal is a full remote company. 6 months of working there, and there's people I've never seen in person. I don't know how tall some of my coworkers are, but I know what the insides of their homes look like. I've seen their children, their pets. That's interaction that could have completely got swept under the rug, even at an office like WeWork, which was also very progressive, very casual, and like where people were encouraged to wear the identity on their sleeve. In comparison to industries that are forced to have that change right now, I'm looking at traditional architecture firms. I'm looking at finance companies. They're kind of being dragged by their ankles into that kind of culture because the cost of maintaining traditional management structures outside of a typical office space is really, really hard. So I feel like that's kind of another interesting change to come from the kind of pandemic work culture that's happening. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there for people who might have felt stifled before to kind of reach out and like take other opportunities or experience other types of workplaces.
So enough talk about space, because I see Greg is starting to
No.
So I'm gonna throw you a curveball.
I just meant that like I think these two can speak on it much more than I can.
That's not necessarily true. You do deal in virtual worlds. That's going to become a bigger and bigger part of our lives.
Yeah, I mean that is true. I did just pick up the Quest 2 last night, that virtual headset. I think that's, the technology to view and interact with space is getting funded at a much faster rate. These companies are exploding with the new tech, the new hardware, whereas 4 to 5 years ago, it was a pushover. Like, okay, the investment in VR, what's the ROI in this now 5 years ago compared to now is much higher, because I think it's easier to use technology. The quality is far superior, and so we're finally starting to see some of the technology that we pushed aside 5 to 6 years ago come back to the forefront and really be an accessible, affordable option for viewing, interacting, sharing, selling, and just living in spaces in a virtual environment.
Well, you guys heard it. The future is here. These guys are building it. So based on your kind of planning comment, Greg, I'm gonna throw you a curveball here. And Mandi and Weija, you guys should think about this while Greg is answering. But when you were planning your move, what was your frame of mind when you were making this switch, and what was your plan B?
Well, there was still. So when I would get home from work as a manager, at WeWork, and just seeing my artists just create this, like, incredible work, I was extremely jealous. So jealousy was a huge, reason as to why I would go home, study tutorials. Like, I need to get back to this because I was very jealous, but I knew how important my role as a manager was, and so I found myself learning new software, more specifically Unreal Engine, and getting into real-time rendering technology. I thought that going back to the older way of how I used to create images, I found it wasn't so easy for me to get back into that. I thought it was a bit, after seeing the real-time technology, I kind of fell back in love with creating beautiful creative work, renderings, animations, and I found with real-time technology it fit my workflow and mindset so much better. And I found myself enjoying learning a complete new language, a complete new technology, software that was nothing compared to what I learned in the past. And I thought, okay, if and when I make a switch, I'm going to switch into a full-time, real-time artist. I want to create video games. I want to create environments. And then I thought, no, I don't, because I heard that industry is very rough, and so I said, okay, what other industries can latch on to this? There's got to be a niche market, especially with our industries. Finding the niche market for whatever you do is extremely important, and try and utilizing that as best you can. So I thought that the world of fashion could really benefit from real-time technology, virtual runway shows, building out all kinds of product visualization, commercials, animations, and leveraging real-time technology. It really fit the mold. And so when I had made plans to transition out, I was like, okay, I'm going to really push that market. I'm going to sell myself there. But I needed to make money sooner. I needed to transition not 100% into that world. I needed to kind of build a business of my own to gain some traction to leverage that, to then approach certain industries. So a lot of it was the urge to get back into the creative world of things. And once my mind was more focused and I was excited to actually wake up and do creative work again, my mind was much clearer. I had a better understanding about the industry, because when you just find yourself being complacent, and that's something I despise, especially in a creative industry, I think your mind, you really can't focus. You really can't see what's out there. So a lot of it we started as just being jealous of the industry and the creative field getting better while I wasn't part of it.
That FOMO.
Seriously, 100%.
Mandi, Weija, who wants to go next?
That can go. I think when I was in the career transition, I think the first one I would describe it, my mindset as terrified. There was a lot of disappointment, and also a lot of FOMO, that I felt like the questions I were asking were invalid because they weren't questions that a normal architect would be asking. And within the company I was at, I found that there was a lot of things I wanted to know, but when I looked around in the org, there was no one to ask that question to, much less actually answer it, or even have a discussion with me about it. And that that made me really scared because it made me wonder, like, where am I in the right place? And even when I got like outside of that context, I didn't know how to speak the language. So when I entered this career transition, I didn't have the vocabulary to speak about the problems that I had at all. And like, we have a lot of like, there's a lot of architects in the room, obviously, a lot of built environment professionals. We all know we have kind of a jargon, we have an industry lingo. And that was kind of the most terrifying part of coming out, was all of a sudden I went from being being in a place where I thought I knew a lot of stuff and realizing that I actually wanted to know a lot of stuff that wasn't there. So it was just like my entire dictionary got like thrown out the window. And even when I like started talking to other people in tech, in data products and product management, I kind of found myself kind of glorifying them because like they were using words that I didn't know. I imagined them to be successful, but like it took a lot of training and a lot of meeting people to kind of get me out of that scared space to actually start listening to what they were saying without putting them on a pedestal, and then realizing that we actually had a lot of the same challenges, and we could actually speak the same language. So yeah, like it went from terror to kind of curiosity, to kind of realization that like there are ways of learning from other people, but that without like necessarily using them as like perfect examples. I mean, that terror comes every time I face like a forced transition. It's happened multiple times, but I think I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. The fear.
Yeah, and just for me, I guess quickly for me, it wasn't so much the fear, it was more transitioning to real estate. If it didn't work out, I could always go back to being an architect, work 9 to 9 every day, and decent salary, like do what I enjoy. That was my fallback plan. That was my plan B. But you can't really, we all know you can't really do more if you don't take a risk, right? So the worst comes to worst, you go back to what you were good at doing before, and no loss there and no regret. So that's my piece takeaway there. And then looks like Greg pointed out that there's a question in the chat. So
yeah. So you can start on that one actually. What do you wish you had known before making your career shift?
I wish I knew everything I knew now just 10 years ago. No, it's hard to say. I think really just for me, working in architecture for all those years, I had my head down. I wasn't really looking around. I wish, the one thing I would say is for everyone to keep, even though what might be in front of you might be really important, and you want to do it and you want to do it well, I think it's always important to keep your head up, looking around for different opportunities. It might not be what you expected to do in the future, but it's always good to keep your eyes peeled and aware of everything else that's going on. That's what I would say to myself.
Greg, you were ready to pounce on this one?
Oh, well, I think the idea of leaving an environment where I'm surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of people a day, speaking to dozens of people, having a team to go to lunch with or get some drinks with, or do anything, and just the impromptu conversations that you would have, and then making a shift to starting your own business, starting it by yourself on your own. I wish I had known, honestly, how lonely that transition was going to be and how much you would miss that interaction with humans. And whether it be if you're an introvert or extrovert, it really depends on that kind of personality. But for me, just sitting in my apartment, not having calls, not having lunches with people, not talking, not even saying a single word unless it was with my dog. It's like how lonely that transition from being around people so much to then being on your own, doing some freelance, trying to start your own business, realizing how much of a struggle that is. Just be prepared for like a complete mental shift. And I thought I knew it would kind of come to that, but not as much as I imagined.
For sure.
It's a very depressing answer.
No, I'm sure COVID didn't help that either.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's like piled on top of each other. It's like, yeah.
I have the urge to like schedule like weekly coffees with you now, Greg.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, one of the things that I wish I knew before I made the career shift. Like I said before, when I started the shift, I had no idea what I was targeting. I really just kind of knew the things that I wanted. I wanted to be more data driven. I wanted to practice like better ethics. I wanted to manage manage a team well. I knew that I wanted like a team, like a good team was something that I was missing. What I didn't know was that like all of those things were things that just kind of added up to my like professional work style and not necessarily the domain that I wanted to go into. And for a long time, I was trying to use those things to try and define a domain. And that just wasn't going to work because they were just these big general things. Like you could be a data-driven anything. You could have a great team to do anything. You could do a lot of things creatively. And I struggled a lot at that point, like realizing that just by thinking about the things that I did well, didn't necessarily indicate the thing that I had passion for. And it took a long time to develop that agency. And it actually took a lot of help too. It took a while for me. I think I was unemployed for about 4-5 months before I actually like started actively asking people for help because I was getting desperate. And that was the turning point for me where I started talking to other people. I started learning those new words I talked about. I started hearing challenges that resonated with me. And like how, like, I think the turning point was I had an interview with this ad agency. Like, I think I got the interview just because they were wondering why in the world an architect was applying to be a data analyst at an ad agency. Like that was the first time I talked to a senior, like a really senior person. Like for some reason, the VP of data governance was interviewing me. And she just looked at me just like, you can be a data analyst, but I don't think you'll be happy here because I don't hear the passion for a domain that like you really need, even though you have all the skills and you have the right mindset. And then we just started talking about problems, and it's like, yeah, these problems exist everywhere. I advise that like you go find a domain that you're passionate about to address those problems because those problems will exist there as well. And that's actually what ended up bringing me to WeWork and finding this organization that that was, for better or worse, really rapidly solving problems all over the place. And that brought me a lot of joy. But it took, yeah, if I had, I wish I reached out for help sooner so that I could learn those things. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of preparation for these kids to do in their career transitions. We have another audience question. So you've been in at least 2 different industries now. Greg, you've been in probably more than 10. But what is that golden nugget that you found? That piece of knowledge that you would want your starting industry to incorporate into their practice that you've learned in your journey?
I think, I think especially when you're in your 20s, I think this also just applies to like life. Even like when you're in your 20s and you've just started to like get your first job, and you immediately get such a terrible understanding of what the industry actually is and what actually is out there and what it means to be an artist, to a junior, to a senior, to a manager, to a VP or whatever, a startup. Like when you're at such a young age, you're just like, okay, I'm going to create work and that's all I'm going to do. And I think that it's really frustrating with the young talent that comes out of school that enters their first career. They have such a little understanding of the reality. And I think a lot of us, when we entered our 30s to our mid 30s, I can start saying late 30s in a couple weeks because it'll be my birthday, but I'm not ready yet. And so I think that's when I really understood. It's like, oh my God, half of the things I learned, and a lot of that was like, okay, the amount of pressure you put on yourself at a young age is completely ridiculous. And everybody focusing on the money. It's like, oh, a higher salary means I will be happy, and that's something that when you're in your 20s, you think, oh, I need more money because that's the only way to survive in life. And so really understanding that, oh, before you jump in, really kind of, we've been talking about it a little bit, is really understanding what is out there and finding that domain or that industry that you're passionate about. I wish I found the fashion industry inspiration 10 years ago, because who knows where I would be. I think really understanding what you do and where it can apply, not just in New York or LA, but around the world, and where your expertise could potentially, fill a spot. And I always thought finding the company you want to work for and the person you can relate to that runs these companies is a very important first step. Like, if don't just jump into a company because, oh, you get paid more, a $5,000 difference in $5,000 difference in the salary is actually nothing in comparison to happiness and potential growth and believing in a mission. And a lot of times when you're in your 20s, you don't really understand that. And I think it's really a big push for the young creative talent to kind of grasp that and before it's too late.
Weijia, any wise words of warning?
I think I wish something that would be applied more fully in the architecture industry maybe is just understanding that there is potential to maybe for architects to invest in the projects that they build, to take more agency in taking responsibility for their designs. I don't think necessarily architects understand the investment structure for a lot of the buildings that they build. Maybe instead of taking a fee, they take an interest in the future cash flow of the property. And, that's a way of creating long-term income for a firm and the ability to maybe do different projects that are not purely fee-based, that could be more pro bono, could be more tied to what their interests are. I just think, there could be more of a fusion between architecture and real estate development.
I'd like to riff off that one for stuff that I wish my original industry applied. It's the agility and the creativity of alternative business models too. They're like, after leaving architecture industries and kind of going and exposing myself to more tech companies, there's a freedom of strategizing around how businesses can be handled differently. That like I didn't realize was agile as it was. For example, at Teal, it took one meeting for us to realize that our business model was off, and we pivoted. And I couldn't imagine going in an architecture firm saying, my business model is off, let's pivot how our income comes in. Like, that is crazy. And that's a lesson I wish that the industry would learn, because I think it would open a lot of doors and also allow for a lot of the kind of change that I feel like all four of us are kind of thirsty for in the design industry. And related to that, I think one of the things I wish I had I championed better when I was working in architecture was being explicit about absolutely everything, like compensation, like growth plans, like expectations, and holding myself and the company accountable for them. Like the creativity that I just mentioned only really works if everybody kind of lives up to those promises and doesn't really bank off these kind of more subjective or implicit values that we kind of come up with. To kind of your point, Greg, if you don't understand what your needs are explicitly, then especially when you're young, you're just going to keep trying to get more and more and more of things that you don't necessarily think that you need. Like compensation is a classic example, like salary compensation is a classic example. But if you're creative if you know what your needs are, including what mission you want to pursue, what types of projects you want to work on, where you want that position to take you, then all of a sudden there's all these other levers that an employer can pull to meet you with greater value that aren't necessarily comp, or that aren't necessarily cash. I wish like I think there's a bad habit in architecture and design firms to kind of implicitly like give you those things and like kind of promise them, but there are no mechanisms to kind of hold everybody accountable for them. So I wish, like, again, going back to the original industry, I wish more of that was present and I knew how to enforce that as an employee.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think part of what Rio Creative Consultancy, part of what our offering is talent retention and understanding why people are leaving and why are they only here for 6 to 12 months, and why are they unhappy, and really breaking down the communication breakdown between managers, artists, and then the managers who they report into, because there's definitely something lost in translation, and it's very hard to just trust one person to manage a whole team when they don't have all the tools necessary. So I think it's a lot of these things, like you said, if it's not just a compensation adjustment saying, hey, okay, we could give you, then WeWork did this very well for a certain amount of time, a professional development fund, right? And so everybody was given an X amount of dollars to use towards professional growth. And for a lot of people on the WeWork visualization team, that meant that we're going to fly to Europe and we're going to go to a conference and meet some of our, creative, like, people that we follow in the industry. Then we could finally talk to the people who made the Avengers movie, or we could speak at these conferences, or we could introduce ourselves. Heck, even if it's just working with our team in the UK, there's a lot that you can do to keep your team. Well, not necessarily keep them, because you don't just want to keep them. You want to help them get to where they need to go. And if that means them leaving, you should be supportive of that as well. So I think a lot of the talent retention is not just compensation, it's just understanding, the tools they need. And if that's a new software, and that software costs $4,000, it's like, okay, we answered and we heard you guys. Or if it's really cleaning up the foundational issues that really hold them back, it's like, just understanding your team better goes miles.
I mean, on the topic of talent retention, we're gonna move on to our last question from Caro. Obviously, our industries have made a lot of mistakes losing, this panel of talent to other industries. But let's start with Weija on this one. Do you regret anything in your transition process?
That's a tough question. In all honesty, not really. I think I'm glad that I've gone through it. I'm glad also for the time that I put in doing architecture, and I still am. I still want to have my own architecture firm and still, working on that on the side. But it is. I think that it's all built up over time. You learn from the mistakes you make. And I remember when I was younger, when I was 18, doing an internship in architecture, the older employees told me, do not do architecture. But I was young. I didn't really understand what they meant. And it was only after I worked, when I got to their age and had put in their time, did I realize what they meant. And I think that's part of the personal growth and the learning that you need to do. So honestly, I don't really have any regrets in the transition.
Oh yeah, no regrets. Mandi?
No, I don't regret any stages in my transition. Like, I think that comes from having made a lot of mistakes to learn from. Similar to Weija, I did an internship in architecture a long time ago too, and got into similar response. I think the principal there just kind of looked at me and was like, I don't think you want to be an architect. And I actually had to beg to have like a design project. I think she let me like design a handrail and like a ornamental wall or something on this like master plan project. And I was like, I really should have trusted that feedback a little bit earlier, because I think she saw some of the values in me that I didn't see in myself. But I learned a lot by designing that wall and having a really bad time doing it. And then like that's kind of a similar story going on too. It's just like I managed to take enough opportunities and embrace enough change that I had a lot of experiences. And for any one of them, I think I could point back and indicate something I learned and like how at the end of it I actually came out a better professional. So maybe that's kind of like looking in the past with some like rosy lenses, but I don't regret any of them.
Love it. Are we 3 for 3?
No, I mean, I've got a ton of regrets in my life. I mean, let's be honest. But specifically for my professional transition, I believe that my biggest regret is not being mindful of my mental and physical health during this transition. I think for me, if you're not clear-headed or if you're not taking care of yourself, I think you fall into a funk. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. You're not going to get there at the best of your capabilities. And once I left WeWork and I was falling into a bit of a depression and like just being kind of alone all the time and being away from something that I'd been part of for 5 years, I had all these grand ideas and I started off very strong. But then it kind of just went down as a roller coaster. I was up and down. And then I think if you're not mentally strong and at least taking care of yourself physically, I think I didn't do enough of that to prepare through my transition. So I think mental health is a huge thing to be mindful of during any major transition, whether it be professional or personal. So I think that's something I again was unaware of how much it would affect me. And then being able to crawl out of that and realizing what you've just been through, you know, is really, really good for yourself. So I think that was the biggest regret, was not being consistent with both physical and mental health.
Awesome. I know we're on time, but was there any last things anybody wanted to add? You get 1 sentence each.
Where should I go? Don't do it alone. Find communities, join Lunch Club, join Teal, anything. Take your challenges and field them in from other people.
I'd say reach out to everybody as much as possible, because there are people in your job that do really cool shit and that you don't really know. And once you learn as much as you can, then you open up your mind. And that's how I got into like Matterport scanning and 3D scanning, because I knew so many friends and colleagues that were into that. So that's now part of my transition and career. And also, if you're looking to get a dog in your life, please adopt and don't shop. That's a very important factor to think about in life.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for inviting me, inviting us. And I think just don't be afraid to make a change. It's always scary to step out of your comfort zone. But you know, as you can see here, there's lots of success stories out there, and you just have to take the leap. And you know, finally, you know, you have to be ready that when you start running your own business, you're going to be putting in more time than you would working for someone else. And that's because you really care and it's all on you. But if you really are passionate about it, it won't feel like work. So it might sound cheesy, but I think it's kind of true, at least in my experience.
No, definitely sage advice. No, thanks to all of you for gracing us with your time, your insightful advice, and really, you know, for everyone watching, giving them the benefit of your experience and, you know, some of the things that you went through. And, you know, I really want to thank you for, you know, reminding me. I think I learned, you know, keep my eyes open to what's out in the world, and, you know, take care of myself, especially after Greg's soliloquy. And then finally, no regrets, right? Like, you know, take a risk, make things happen. And, you know, all of us here are great examples of what taking a risk could turn out to be. So thank you all, and happy Wednesday.
Thank you.
See you later, guys. Bye.